If you own a mid to late 60s to, let's say, mid 1980s Mercedes-Benz that has a 4, 5, or 6-cylinder engine in it, I can almost guarantee at some point you're going to have to deal with this right here. And this can be gasoline or diesel. This isn't diesel specific, although I'm talking about this under our diesel subject line, because the problems, these diesels run a lot longer and people tend to use them as daily drivers, so the problem's more likely to crop up on a diesel than on a gas engine. But the problem is even deeper than that, and I'll get into that in this video. This is the water pump right here. Typical water pump from, you know, gas and diesel. It's mounted to an aluminum housing, and this aluminum housing is mounted to the block, and this housing helps to circulate water through the engine. The problems come in 2 or 3 areas. Number one, water pumps wear out. It's a common wear item. It might be, you know, 100,000 to 120,000 miles. Seems like you're going to have to replace the water pump. And the housings are generally okay unless you don't remove the water pump properly, and then you're going to have a big problem with this aluminum housing. Let me explain that in more detail. I'm going to use these 3 water pumps and housings as an example. This one in the center here is off a gas engine, and these 2 here are off diesels. Notice that they're attached, all of them, whether gas or diesel, are attached to this housing with 5 bolts. You can see the bolts here and you can see the bolts there. Now these bolts are steel and the housing is aluminum. And you're in a high moisture environment by being around a water pump. So guess what the problem is? Okay, if you're not familiar with this, by the end of this video, this will be my number 1 goal in this video, is teach you about the problem of what happens when steel bolts go into aluminum housings. Now this has happened so many times. What I'm going to show you in this video has happened so many times. We've had so many emails, so many people reporting problems, that I finally decided to do a video on this. And you'll get your new water pump and you'll get your new gasket and you'll get your wrench in here and you'll say, wow, you know, this isn't going to be a problem. I'm just going to start loosening these bolts. And you'll start, you know, they're going to be kind of stiff and you're going to start tightening, loosening them like this, and pretty soon they're going to get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And if you keep forcing it, you can see that sometimes it'll even bind up the socket. But if you keep forcing that, you can break the head of the bolt right off. And then you have what we call a big wrench dance. Because you can't just go in there and drill out a steel bolt in aluminum housing and expect to get it to save the threads. It's near impossible. So you want to avoid the problem. That's the whole goal here. Anytime you're replacing a water pump on these older Mercedes, you want to avoid breaking the heads off these bolts, because if you do, my recommendation is that you find another housing, a good used housing from a different engine, and replace it. Once again, if you want to try to tackle drilling and tapping out that, it's not going to come out with an easy out, by the way. When you break these off, they're so seized into the aluminum that you have to drill them. And you're drilling steel, and then you're trying to tap through the steel into a fragile aluminum. All I can say is good luck. So this is what I do. If I feel that the bolt is getting very tight, like this one, you can see this one's getting real tight, and this one down here, let's see how that one's doing. Okay, it's getting real tight right in there. I will back it out as far as I can, and then I will get a rust penetrant like PB Blaster, coil oil, liquid wrench, and spray these bolts. You have to back them out a little bit so that you can get the penetrant. There it goes. You can see on this one, you can actually see the penetrant wicking down in. See that? It's wicking right down into the threads. If you spray it on a tight bolt like this, it's not going to wick as far down in the threads as you would want it to. Then, usually I'll let this sit for a while. For the purpose of this video, I'm not. Let's say I've let this sit for a couple hours. I may come back and after an hour and spray it again. Let it soak in there. Now, the next part of this tip is critical. And that is, you do not want to just take the bolt and run it straight out. This is very important because what you're going to do is if you start just reefing on this bolt, pretty soon it's going to cut into the aluminum threads and it's going to take the aluminum threads out with the bolt. So even though you get the bolt out, the threads in the housing are going to be shot. So what I do is I'll back it out until it gets tight, and then I will change the direction on my ratchet, and then I'm going to tighten it right back in. See that? Till it's loose. And then I will change direction again, and I will back it out again until it's a little bit past the point where it's getting hard again. Then I will change direction again, run it in until it's loose. Now you're going to think, man, this is going to take a while. Well, let me tell you, this is easy compared to dealing with a broken bolt or a stripped out thread in this housing. I speak from experience. Now, as you do this, see, you're working that penetrant back and forth into the threads. And you're going to maybe have to do this 10, 15, 20 times. And eventually, you'll feel the bolt start to come out with more ease. And at that point, you can take the bolt the rest of the way out. If you are having to really torque on it, stop. Add more penetrant, run it back in, run it back out. Do not take it all the way out. All right, look at that. Now it's running free. See this? And if I'm not having to torque on it, then I'm going to be safe on removing the bolt from the housing. You can see how far down these threads are in these housings. Look at that. And you can see why when they break off, you're going to believe it when I said good luck on trying to get it out. Every time that's happened, I have just replaced the housing, okay? Now look at that. Look at the amount of rust and corrosion on this. Now I look down in here, you can't see it probably in the video, but I see clean aluminum threads. So if I hadn't have done that, I could tell you right now, this is a really old, this is like a late 60s housing. If I hadn't have used this procedure, that bolt head would have broken off. If you do have to replace the housing, I need to also warn you about this balance tube right here. This goes from the housing up to the cylinder head on many of these engines. And the problem with this is almost more pronounced than the problem with these bolts, because these are banjo bolts and they're thinner and they have a hole in the center, so they break even more easily than these bolts. So if you're removing the housing, you have to treat the two bolts, the two banjo bolts on this balance tube with great care. Let's see what happens with this one. Okay, look at that. It's loose, but it's hitting, see? So it's not rotating. That's bad. You have to be careful about that. So let's soak this with a little penetrant. Now, if I can't get this to move at all with penetrant, then I'm going to come in here with the propane torch. You know, once again, if you're working around a gasoline engine, you have to be really careful using heat like that, and you have to make sure you have fire extinguishers handy. But sometimes the propane torch, a little heat here, will get this to break. Let's see if we can get it to break without heat. I'm not going to force it too much. Okay, it just came. See that? And I'm just going to lightly turn it. Okay, it's getting a little stiff. So I'm going to spray a little more penetrant in there. Now I'm going to reverse direction on my wrench, and I'm going to tighten it back down. And I'll reverse again. Okay, it's starting to tighten up again. Okay, let's reverse again. And I'll move it in until I feel it loose. And then I'm going to back it out here. All right, now it's coming. See that? Little stiff, but nothing that I need to really torque on. And at this point, I should be able to take it out the rest of the way by hand. And you're going to see why this bolt is a problem. All right. See that right there? It's got a hole through the bolt, which allows coolant to pass through. And that's why that bolt is so weak. If the threads right here are seized into the aluminum housing and you try to reef that head, you'll break this off. And this is even more difficult to get out and retap than the water pump bolts themselves. So this is a good principle that you can learn working with any bolts, not just water pump bolts and balance banjo bolts, but any bolts, steel bolts that are going into aluminum. Use this technique when you go to remove them, and you'll be very happy you did.